Good evening, and welcome to another night of reading Theodore Dreiser's Sister Carrie. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to everybody who's joining after the fact as well. I'm sure you can hear the furnace chugging away on this cold December night in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow we're going to be having snow, beginning at around 6 a.m. and continuing to 6 p.m. Wintry mix, accumulation 3 to 5 inches, high of 36 degrees. Any travel plans? Be advised for many delays and get comfortable wherever you are. Time to switch YouTube account so I can keep an eye on the chat. 10 people watching. Yo, says Matt Lazaro. Hello, hi Dad. Nissan Truzo, Dude. Good evening, Professor R. I wouldn't be mind calling that in real life. Maybe someday I'll return to academia and teach books like this in front of a class. It's Brian Lowe again. Hello, Brian would be a great voiceover guy. I wonder how you get a job like that, being a voiceover guy. Wouldn't mind a job like that. Zigzag, I actually just watched IIHS video on the Tuzuro. My God. Good morning from Nepal. Suzuki Bob says motorcycle reviews. Wow. Open offer to Jordan Jensen, comedian, to come on RCR in the springtime. That would get me to do motorcycle reviews again. I already had a beer. I already had a 90-minute IPA, and now we're going to have Slightly Mighty Low-Cal IPA. APV of 4%. Light beer in my book. So we're going to pick up here with Sister Carrie, where we picked off before. If you remember, Sister Carrie is looking. She's trying to find a job. Carrie Meeber, protagonist of this story, is trying to find a job. And she finds it difficult to even ask for one. She's in downtown Chicago in the year 1889. So she spent all day looking for jobs and only was able to gather the courage to walk into 3 different businesses and ask for a job. And of course they said, no, we don't need any. So she found relief mingling with the crowd. She's walking outside now. In her indifferent wandering, she turned into Jackson Street, not far from the river, and was keeping her way along the south side of that imposing thoroughfare, when a piece of wrapping paper written on it with marking ink and tacked upon a door attracted her attention. It read, "Girls Wanted, Wrappers and Stitchers." She hesitated for a moment, thinking surely to go in, but upon further consideration, the added qualifications of wrappers and stitchers deterred her. She had no idea what that meant. Most probably she would need to be experienced in it. She walked on a little way, mentally balancing as to whether or not to apply. Necessity triumphed, however, and she returned. The entrance, which opened into a small hall, led to an elevator shaft, the elevator of which was up. It was a dingy affair, being used both as freight and passenger entrance, and the woodwork was marked and splintered by the heavy boxes which were tumbled in and out at intervals. A frowsy-headed German-American, about 14 years of age, operated the elevator in his shirt sleeves and bare feet. His face was considerably marked with grease and dirt. So, in these days, there were no buttons in elevators. You had to have someone to operate them. I'm sure there are many podcasts talking about these sort of golden age of elevators when you didn't just get in and push a button. There had to be someone there to operate it for you. It sounds very strange. It's kind of like how New Jersey, you can't pump your own gas. That sort of strange thing. So there is it's interesting that he made the point to say this is a German-American immigrant. And this is a kid operating this elevator. This is a 14-year-old. That's like a 8th grader operating this. No child labor laws in 1889. Didn't even, when he says operated in his shirt sleeves, that means just wearing like a white t-shirt, although t-shirts really hadn't been invented yet. And he wasn't wearing shoes. When the elevator stops, the boy leisurely raised a protecting arm of wood and by grace of his superior privilege, admitted to her. "Where do you want to go?" he inquired. "I want to see the manager," she replied. It's funny that where... I can't do a German accent, even though I technically am German. "Where do you want to go?" "What manager?" he returned, surveying her casually. "Is there more than one?" she asked. "I thought it was all one firm." "No," said the youth. "Der 6 different people. Want to see the Spiegelham?" "I don't know," answered Carrie. She colored a little, which means blush. She colored a little as she began to feel the necessity of explaining. "I want to see whoever put up that sign." "Dot Spiegelham," said the boy. "4th floor." Therewith he proudly turned to his task of pulling the rope, and the elevator ascended. So when he pulled a rope, there are no buttons. There's a rope that goes all the way down, and you pull on it, and the elevator goes up. Maybe there's someone at the top. I don't know how these old non-button operated elevators worked. The firm of Spiegelham and Company, makers of boys' caps, occupied one floor of 50 feet in which there were some 80 feet depth. It was a place rather dingly lighted, the darkest portion having incandescent lights filled in part with machines and part with workbenches. So as old and as messy as this assembly plant is, it does have electric lights. So it's got something going for it in 1889. And filled in part with machines and part with workbenches. And the latter labored quite a company of girls and some men. The former were drabby-looking creatures, stained in face with oil and dust, clad in thin, shapeless cotton dresses, and stood with more or less worn shoes. Many of them had their sleeves rolled up, revealing bare arms, and in some cases, owing to heat, their dresses were open at the neck. They were a fair type of nearly the lowest order of shop girls. Careless, rather slouchy, and more or less pale from confinement. They were not timid, however. They were rich in curiosity and strong in daring and slang. Carrie looked about her, very much disturbed. and quite sure that she did not want to work here. Aside from making her uncomfortable by sidelong glances, no one paid her attention. She waited until the whole department was aware of her presence, and then some word was sent round, and a foreman in an apron and shirt sleeves, the latter rolled up to his shoulders, appeared. So she comes on the shop floor, so she doesn't know what to do. So she just stands there. Everybody's around her working, and she's just, And then finally the manager comes over. "Do you want to see me?" he asked. "Do you need any help?" said Carrie, already learning directness of address. "Do you know how to stitch caps?" he returned. "No, sir," she replied. "Have you ever had any experience at this kind of work?" he inquired. She owed that she hadn't. "Well," said the foreman, scratching his ear meditatively, "we do need a stitcher. We like experienced help, though. We've hardly got time to break people in." He paused and looked away out the window. "We might, though, put you at finishing," he concluded reflectively. "How much do you pay a week?" ventured Carrie, emboldened by a certain softness in the man's manner and his simplicity of address. "3.50, he answered. "Oh," she was about to exclaim, but checked herself and allowed her thoughts to die without expression. "We're not exactly in need of anybody," he went on vaguely, looking her over as one would a package. "You can come in Monday morning, though," he added. "I'll put you to work." "Thank you," said Carrie weakly. "If you come, bring an apron," he added. He walked away and left her standing by the elevator, never so much as inquiring her name. While the appearance of the shop and the announcement of the price paid per week operated very much like a blow to Carrie's fancy, the fact that work of any kind, after so rude a round of experience, was offered her was gratifying. She could not begin to believe that she would take the place, modest as her aspirations were. She had been used to better than that. Her mere experience and the free out-of-doors life of country caused her nature to revolt at such confinement. Dirt had never been her share. Her sister's flat was clean. This place was grimy and low. The girls here were careless and hardened. And when Dreiser uses the word careless, he doesn't mean like they're clumsy or, unthinking. He just means that they don't care about their appearance. Remember, as we discussed last class, Carrie had spent the entire day looking around at fantastic shops. She even walked into a department store. And you're meant to see the contrast of life. That she had just been in fantastic, shining, clean department stores. And now she's in this kind of knitting mill where people are just making baseball. Well, we wouldn't call them baseball caps today. We just call them hats. Maybe something with a brim, little cabbie caps. Or so-called cabbie hats, maybe, that they're making here at this little factory on the 5th floor of an ugly building with not a lot of windows. Anyway, and the girls were careless and hardened. They must be bad-minded and hearted, she imagined. Still, a place had been offered her. Surely Chicago was not so bad if she could not find a place in one day. She might find another, and better later. Her subsequent experiences were not of a reassuring nature, however. From all the more pleasing or imposing places, she was turned away abruptly with the most chilling formality. In others, where she applied, only the experience were required. She met with painful rebuffs. Once again, remember, this is the fourth place she applied to. The fourth. And she got in. So she was only denied 3 times, and she's now thinking of, I had no luck today. She got a job in one day. No, said the foreman, a rough, heavy-built individual who looked after a miserably lighted workshop. We don't want anyone. Don't come here. Excuse me, I made a mistake. In the previous paragraph, she in fact does go to other factories. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Let me reread the last paragraph. Her subsequent experiences were not of a reassuring nature. So Carrie leaves this one factory where she was offered a wage of $3.50 a week. Now, remember, she needs to pay $4 every week to Minnie and her husband for her share of the rent. This place doesn't even offer that. So she's going to other factories and other places near the one she was just at in hopes of finding someplace better. Speaking of money, we had one super chat come in. Suzuki Bob says, I enjoy this more than I should. I think you're enjoying it right. Marth says, do you guys already have snow in Pennsylvania? No, snows tomorrow. T-shirts haven't been invented. What? I assume there's something close to a shirt in 1889, but the idea of a T-shirt as something you wear around during the day is not something that would have been done in 1889. An undershirt was exactly that, a undershirt. You would wear it under your clothes. Brian, please read Steinbeck next. Getting a job in 1890s is a lot easier than today, it seems. I practically prostrated myself for 2 weeks waiting for someone to get back to me. Yeah. The worst part is they don't even take the time to reject you anymore. No, that's true. So Carrie goes into other shops trying to get jobs, and she was rebuffed. From all the more pleasing, imposing places, she was turned away abruptly with the most chilling formality. In others, where she applied, only the most experienced were required. She was met with painful rebuffs, the most trying of which had been the cloak manufacturing house, where she had gone to the 4th floor to acquire. No, said the foreman, a rough, heavy-built individual who looked after a miserably lighted workshop. We don't want anyone. Don't come here. Another factory, she was leered upon by the most sensual-faced individual who endeavored to turn the natural questions of inquiry into a more personal interview, asking all sorts of embarrassing questions and endeavoring to satisfy himself evidently that she was of loose enough morals to suit his purpose. So pretty much she's the manager of some other place, just wants to bang. In that case, she had been relieved enough to get away and found the busy, indifferent streets to be again a soothing refuge. With the wane of the afternoon went her hopes, and her courage and her strength. She had been astonishingly persistent. So earnest in an effort was well deserving of a better reward. On every hand, her fatigued senses, the great business portion grew larger, harder, and more stolid in its indifference. It seemed as if all was closed to her. that the struggle was too fierce for her to hope to have anything to do at all. Men and women hurried by in long, shifting lines. She felt the flow of the tide of effort and interest, and felt her own helplessness without quite realizing the wisp on the tide that she was. She was cast about vainly for some possible place to apply, but found no door which she had the courage to enter. It would be the same thing all over. The old humiliation of her pleas rewarded by curt denial. Sick at heart and in body, she turned to the west, the direction of Minnie's flat, which she had now fixed in mind, and began that wearisome, baffled retreat which the seeker for employment at nightfall too often makes. In passing through Fifth Avenue towards Van Buren Street, where she intended to take a car, and by car they don't mean automobile, they mean essentially a trolley, a streetcar, light rail on the streets. She passed the door of a large wholesale shoe house. Through the plate glass window, of which she could see a middle-aged gentleman sitting at a small desk. One of those forlorn impulses which often grow out of a fixed sense of defeat, the last sprouting of a baffled and uprooted growth of ideas, seized upon her. She walked deliberately through the door and up to the gentleman, who looked at her weary face with partially awkward interest. "What is it?" he said. "Can you give me something to do?" asked Carrie. "Now, I really don't know," he said kindly. "What kind of work is it you want? You're not a typewriter, are you?" Notice that this is the second or possibly third time that someone asks for a typewriter. The idea that someone can type evidently is something they need around there. "Oh, no," answered Carrie. "Well, we only employ bookkeepers and typewriters here. You might go round to the side and inquire upstairs. They did want some help upstairs a few days ago. Ask for Mr. Brown." She hastened around to the side entrance and was taken up by the elevator to the fourth floor. "Call Mr. Brown, Willie," said the elevator man to the boy nearby. Willie went off and presently returned with the information that Mr. Brown said she should sit down and he would be around in a little while. It was a portion of a stock room which gave no idea of the general character of the floor, and Carrie could form no opinion of the nature of the work. She was like, "I'm applying to a job. I have no idea what they do here. I just need something." It was a portion of a stock room which gave no... right. "So you want something to do," said Mr. Brown, after he inquired concerning the nature of her errand. "Have you ever been employed in a shoe factory before?" "No, sir," said Carrie. "What is your name?" he inquired, and began, and being informed, "Well, I don't know if I have anything for you. Would you work for 4.5 a week?" Carrie was too worn by defeat not to feel that it was considerable. She had not expected that he would offer her less than 6. She acquiesced, however, and he took her name and address. "Well," he said finally, "you report here at 8 o'clock Monday morning. I think I can find you something to do." He left her relieved by the possibility, sure that she had found something to do at least. Instantly the blood crept warmly over her body. Her nervous tension relaxed. She walked into the busy street and discovered a new atmosphere. Behold the throbbing... Now, okay. So she found one place that pays $4.50 a week. Her weekly rent is $4, which means she will have a profit of 50 cents a week after working an entire day. or after working an entire week. So let's go to the inflation calculator and find out how much that is in 2022 money. I'm sure some people in the chat will get to it quicker than I can. Okay, so 50 cents, again, the inflation calculator only goes back to 1913. So 50 cents back then is equivalent to $15 today. So after she pays her rent at the end of every week, she'll have $15 left over. Behold, the throng was moving with a lightsome step. She noticed that men and women were smiling. Scraps of conversation and notes of laughter floated to her. The air was light. People were already pouring out of the buildings. Their labor ended for the day. She noticed that they were pleased, and the thoughts of her sister's home and the meal that would be awaiting her quickened her steps. She hurried on, tired perhaps, but no longer weary of foot. What would not Minnie say? Ah, the long winter in Chicago, the lights, the crowd, the amusement. This was a great, pleasing metropolis after all. Her new firm was a goodly institution. Its windows were of huge plate glass. She could probably do well there. Thoughts of Drouet returned. Remember that douchebag on the train who was all up on her? She's thinking of that idiot again. Of the things he had told her. She now felt that life was better, that it was livelier, sprightlier. She boarded a car in the best of spirits, feeling her blood still flowing pleasantly. She would live in Chicago. Her mind kept saying to itself, she would have a better time than she ever had before, and she would be happy. Chapter 4. Let me check the chat real quick. I love this series. Curtis Lambert says, I love the series. Thank you, Roman, for the advice to finally get me to sell my SI. Brian Lowe is saying, Carrie is going for woe is me, but she has no skills and sounds like she sat in a house and did nothing for 18 years. Colbert Simpson says, I'm cleaning a large iron pan, just made chicken and lovely and in love with the reading. I wish it was a class. It pays the rent, it pays the rent. Indeed, she's able to pay rent now. Enough for 5 cans of beans, says Brian Lowe. Chapter 4. For the next 2 days, Carrie indulged in the most high-flown speculations. An excellent essay on the art of high living might well be compiled out of the thoughts of those who, like her, are anxiously anticipating the arrival of a small income. In such cases, want runs swiftly before gathering imaginative delights and privileges. We are all aware that this is not Fancy's novel flailing. She has ever borne a full hope. She has ever borne a full and open purse. Carrie plunged recklessly into privileges and amusements which would have been much more becoming had she been cradled a child of fortune. With ready and will and quick mental selection, she scattered her meager $4.50 per week with a swift and graceful hand. It was spent many times over in a car fare alone, sightseeing, into those vague places of which to the new arrival the city is full, and the entrance to which is purchased alone. She now entered. The rounds of theaters with delighted seats was a simple matter. Her certain income covered it all. So she's just imagining, oh, I have a job now. I can afford all of this stuff. Her purse now, unchangingly filled with it, was carried into every avenue and every store. Portions of its fullness were passed over every counter and broken into small change 1,000 times. And yet it did not fail. Silks, woolens, lingerie, and fine feathers, the necessities and frivolities of fashion as she understood it, all strained its marketing power. But it did not break. Indeed, she sat in her rocking chair those several evenings before going to bed and looked out upon the pleasantly lighted streets, cleared for its protective possessor, the way every joy and every bauble with hearts and woman may desire. The lights, the tinkle of car bells, the late murmur of the city bespoke its power to her. I will have a fine time, she thought over to herself over and over. So she hasn't even had her first day of work yet, and she's imagining all the fun things she's able to do with her salary. Her sister Minnie knew nothing of these rather wild celebrations, though they exhausted the markets of delight. She was too busy scrubbing the kitchen woodwork and calculating the purchasing power of 80 cents for Sunday's dinner when Carrie had returned home, flushed with her first success and ready, for all her weariness, to discuss the now interesting events which led to her achievement. The former had merely smiled approvingly and inquired whether she would have to spend any of it for car fare. The consideration had not entered in before, and it did not now for long affect the glow of Carrie's enthusiasm. Disposed as she then was to calculate upon the vague basis which allows the subtraction of one sum from another without any perceptible demutation, without any lessening, she was happy. So she didn't even start saying, okay, she's thinking of all these things she's going to buy with her money, and she didn't even consider rent yet. Or wait, do I have to take the streetcar to work? When Hanson came home at 7 o'clock, he was inclined to be a little crusty, his usual demeanor before supper. This never showed so much in anything he said as a certain solemnity of countenance, and the slight manner in which he sloped about. So he's tired. He came home from work, cleaning out train cars. He had a pair of yellow carpet slippers which he enjoyed wearing, and those he would immediately substitute for the solid pair of work shoes which he wore. This, and washing his face with the aid of common washing soap until it glowed a shiny red, constituted his only preparation for his evening meal. So he didn't even take a shower yet. He came from work all smelly and dirty. He scrubs his face, he takes off his boots, he puts on his slippers. That's it, he's ready to eat. He would then get his evening paper and read in silence. For a young man, this was rather a morbid turn of character, and so affected Carrie. Indeed, it infected the entire atmosphere of the flat, as such things are inclined to do, and gave to his wife's mind its subdued and tactful turn, anxious to avoid tactum replies. Under the influence of Carrie's announcement, he brightened up somewhat. "You didn't lose any time, did you?" he remarked, smiling a little. "No," replied Carrie with a touch of pride. He asked her one or two more questions and then turned to play with the baby, leaving the subject until it was brought up again by Minnie at the table. Carrie, however, was not to be reduced to the common level of observation which prevailed in the flat. "It seems to be such a large company," she said, at one place. "Great big plain glass windows and lots of clerks. The man I saw said they hired ever so many people." "It's not very hard to get work now," put in Hanson, "if you look right." Minnie, under the warming influence of Carrie's good spirits and her husband's somewhat conversational mood, began to tell Carrie of some of the well-known things to see. Things the enjoyment of which cost nothing. "You'd like to see Michigan Avenue. There are such fine houses. It is a fine street." "Where is H.R. Jacobs?" inquired Carrie, mentioning one of the theaters devoted to melodrama, which went by that name at the time. "Oh, it's not far from here," answered Minnie. "It's at Halsted Street, right up there." "How I'd like to go there. I crossed Halsted today, didn't I?" At this there was a slight halt in the natural reply. Thoughts are a strangely permanent factor. At her suggestion of going to the theater, the unspoken shade of disapproval to the doing of things which involved the expenditure of money, shades of feeling which arose in the mind of Hanson, and then in Millie, slightly affected the atmosphere of the table. Minnie answered yes, but Carrie could feel that going to the theater was poorly advocated here. The subject was staved off for a little while until Hanson, through with his meal, took his paper, and went into the front room. So you get an idea of how frugal Hanson and Millie really are. They don't even go to the movies. They don't even go see a play. They work, they eat, they go home, they sleep. When they were alone, the two sisters began a somewhat freer conversation, Carrie interpreting it to hum a little as they worked together at the dishes, putting the things to rights. "I should like to walk up and see Halsted Street if it isn't too far," said Carrie after a time. "Why don't we go to the theater tonight?" "Oh, I don't think Sven would want to go tonight," returned Minnie. "He has to get up early." "He wouldn't mind. He'd enjoy it," said Carrie. "No, he doesn't go very often," returned Minnie. "Well, I'd like to go," rejoined Carrie. "Let's you and me go." Minnie pondered a while upon whether she could or would go, for the point was already negatively settled with her, but upon some means of diverting the thoughts of her sister to some other topic. We'll go some other time," she said, at last, finding no ready means to escape. Carrie sensed the root of the opposition at once. "I have some money," she said. "You go with me." Minnie shook her head. "He could go along," said Carrie. "No," returned Minnie softly, rattling the dishes to drown out the conversation. "He wouldn't." It had been several years since Minnie had seen Carrie, and in that time the latter's character had developed a few new shades. Naturally timid at all things which related to her own advancement, and especially so without power or resource, her craving for pleasure was so strong that it was the one stay of her nature, and she would speak for that when silent on all else. "Ask him," she pleaded softly. Minnie was thinking of the resource which Carrie's board would add. It would pay the rent, and would make the subject of expenditure a little less difficult to talk about with her husband. But if Carrie was going to think of running around in the beginning, there would be a hitch somewhere. Unless Carrie submitted to a solemn round of industry and saw the need of hard work without longing for play, how was her coming to the city to profit them? These thoughts were not those of a cold, hard nature at all. They were serious reflections of a mind which inevitably adjusted itself without much complaining to such surroundings as its industry could make of it. So there is some softening from Millie here that what Dreiser is saying, what Millie is thinking is that, look, this girl is coming to live with us to try to make her life, and the first thing she wants to do is go to the theater. It would look better if she worked for a few weeks, saved up some money, and maybe then brought it up. Again, Carrie does not have any work experience, and already she wants to go spend money on things. Suzuki Bob said, wait, so she only has 50 cents to live on after rent weekly. Is that enough to live on? The short answer is yes, even if it is only $15. I think part of the deal is that they're going to feed her. So she has no real expenses apart from just maybe getting to work. She's supposed to save up money. So she would be able to save $15 in today's money a week. That is hilariously poor, though. Imagine if that was your profit at the end of the week, where rent costs that much, and you're left with $15. Now, granted, in the modern world, we have plenty of expenses. We have electricity and all that sort of things. She is paying rent, but at least she's getting her food free. But still, it sucks. At last she yielded enough to ask Hanson. It was a half-hearted procedure without the shade of desire on her part. Carrie wants us to go to the theater, she said, looking in on her husband, Hanson looking up for his paper, and they exchanged a mild look which said as plainly as anything, "This isn't what we expected." "I don't care to go," he returned. "What does she want to see?" H.R. Jacobs, said Minnie. He looked down at his paper and shook his head negatively. Carrie, when she saw how they looked upon the proposition, gained a still clearer feeling of their way of life. It weighed on her, but took no definite form of opposition. "I think I'll go down and stand at the foot of the stairs," she said after a time. Minnie made no objection to this, and Carrie put on her hat and went below. "Where is Carrie gone?" asked Hanson, coming back into the dining room when she heard the door close. "She said she was going to go down to the foot of the stairs," answered Minnie. "I guess she wants to look out a while." She ought, this is an old phrasing. My grandmother used to say this. She oughtn't. She ought not. She oughtn't to be thinking about spending her money on theaters already, don't you think? She asks. "She's just a little curious, I guess," ventured Minnie. "Everything is so new." "I don't know," said Hanson, and went over to the baby, his forehead slightly wrinkled. He was thinking of a full career of vanity and wastefulness which a young girl might indulge in, and wondered how Carrie could contemplate such a course when she had so little as yet to do with. So he's thinking, like, what is this girl thinking? So Carrie sensed that she upset her sister and Hanson, so she's going to walk down to the first floor of the apartment building and just kind of stand in the doorway and look out on the street. So now, that was Friday. Now it's Saturday. She has to go to work on Monday. So now it's Saturday. Carrie went out by herself, first to the river, which interested her, and then back along Jackson, which was then lined by the pretty houses and fine lawns, which subsequently caused it to be made into a boulevard. She was struck with the evidence of wealth, although there was perhaps not a person on the street worth more than $100,000. She was glad to be out of the flat because already she felt that it was a narrow, humdrum place and that interest and joy lay elsewhere. Her thoughts now were of a more liberal character. She punctuated them with speculations as to the whereabouts of Drouet. She's thinking about that douchebag on the train again. She was not sure, but that he might call anyhow Monday night. And while she felt a little disturbed at the possibility, there was nevertheless just a shade of a wish that circumstances were such as it might be. So we skip Sunday now. Dreiser doesn't even tell us what happened Sunday. Probably nothing. So now it's Monday. On Monday, she arose early and prepared to go to work. She dressed herself in a worn sweatshirt, a worn shirt-waist of dotted blue percale, which is a word I don't know what it means. A shirt of light brown turn this more toward me. A skirt of light brown serge. That's another word. I don't know what it means. Man, if I was teaching this in a class, I would have to make tons of notes and vocabulary, words that they don't use anymore. Anyway, light brown, rather faded skirt and a small straw hat which she had worn all summer in Columbia City. Her shoes were rather worn at the tips and heels, and her necktie was in that crumpled, flattened state which time and much wearing impart. She made a very average-looking shop girl, with the exception of her features. They were slightly more even than is common in women, and it gave her a sweet, somewhat reserved air which was pleasing. It's no easy thing to get up early in the morning when one is used to sleeping until between 7 and 8, and as Carrie had been at home. She gained some inkling of the character of Hanson's life when, half asleep, she looked out into the dining room at 6 o'clock and saw him silently finishing breakfast. By the time she dressed, he was gone, and she, Minnie, and the baby ate together, the latter being just old enough to sit by in a high chair and disturb the dishes with a spoon. Her spirits were greatly subdued now, when the fact of entering upon a strange and untried duties confronted her. Only the ashes of all her fine fancies were remaining, ashes still concealing, nevertheless, a few red embers of hope. So she's thinking, well, I'll have a job, I'll have money, I'll be able to have things and happiness. So subdued was she by her weakening nerves that she ate quite in silence, going over imaginary conceptions of the character of the shoe company, the nature of the work, her employer's attitude. She was vaguely feeling that she could come in contact with the great owners, that her work should be where grave, stylishly dressed men occasionally look on. So she's imagining, well, maybe I won't be on the factory floor. Maybe I won't have to do something disgusting. Maybe I'll be working in the office around hot guys. Are we still streaming? Yep, I'm still streaming. Oh, Ambilo has a definition for us. Percale, a closely woven plain weave fabric often used for bed covers. Okay. So it's just like a plain old weave, like a tablecloth. Bed covers and tablecloth. Well, good luck, said Minnie when she was ready to go. They had agreed it was best to walk, that morning at least, to see if she could do it every day. 60 cents a week for car fare being quite an item under the circumstance. Remember, 60 cents, it would cost her 60 cents a week, which means she's negative 10 cents. Because she only comes home at the end of the week with an extra 50 cents after she pays her rent. And if she got a streetcar to work every day, that's more than she can afford. I'll tell you how it goes tonight, said Carrie. Once in the sunlit street, with laborers trampling by in either direction, the horse carts passing, crowded to the rails with small clerks and floor help in the great wholesale houses, men and women generally coming out of doors and passing around the neighborhood, Carrie felt slightly reassured. In the sunshine of the morning beneath the wide blue heavens, with a fresh and wind astir, what fears, except the most desperate, can find harbinage in the human breast? In the night or the gloomy chambers of the day, fears and misgivings wax strong. But out in the sunlight there is, for a time, cessation of even the tenor of death. Carrie went strongly forward until she crossed the river and turned into Fifth Avenue. The thoroughfare in this part was like a walled canyon of brown stone and dark red brick. The big windows of plate glass looked shiny and clean. Trucks were rumbling in increasing numbers. Men and women, girls and boys were moving onward in all directions. She met girls her own age, which looked at her with... She met girls her own age who looked at her as if with contempt for her diffidence. She wondered at the magnitude of this life and the importance of knowing much in order to do anything with it at all. Dread in her own Dread at her own inefficiency crept up on her. She would not know how she would be not quick enough. Had not all the other places refused her because she did not know something or other? She would be scolded, abused, and ignominious. God, that's a good word. Iostally. It's almost like I'm having a stroke. Ignominiously discharged. Let's take this super chat here. Rise Against. Thank you for the donation. Mr. Regular, can I go to the bathroom just in case you are romanticizing your memories of the classroom? I don't know. Can you? May I go to the bathroom? Yes, you may. This is a good story for sure. Imagine spending all your paycheck on rent and not having enough for a bus pass. Yes, Carly, that was the word. I'm having a hard time pronouncing that word. I almost need to hear it. Thank God for Google and that thing right there that pronounces the word for you. It was with but weak knees and a slight catch in her breath that she came up to the Great Shoe Company at Adams and Fifth Avenue and entered the elevator. When she stepped out on the fourth floor, there was no one at hand, only great aisles of boxes piled to the ceiling. She stood, very much frightened, awaiting someone, where a young man with some order slips in hand got off the elevator. "Who is it you want?" he asked her. "Mr. Brown." "Oh," he said. Presently, Mr. Brown came up. He did not seem to recognize her. "What is it you want?" he questioned. Carrie's heart sank. "You said that I should come in this morning and see about work." "Oh," he interrupted. Yeah, what's your name?" "Carrie Meeber." "Yes," said he. "You come with me." He led the way through dark, box-lined aisles which had the smell of new shoes until they came to an iron door which opened into the factory proper. There was a large, low-ceiling room with clacking, rattling machines, at which men in white short sleeves and blue gingham aprons were working. She followed him differently through the clattering automations, keeping her eyes straight before her and flushing slightly. They crossed to a far corner and took an elevator to the 6th floor, so they've gone up another floor. Out of the array of machines and benches, Mr. Brown signaled the foreman. "This is the girl," he said, turning toward Carrie. "You go with him." He then returned, and Carrie followed her new supervisor to a little desk in a corner, which was used as a kind of official center. "You never worked anything like this before, have you?" he questioned her rather sternly. "No, sir," she answered. He seemed rather annoyed at having to bother with such help, but put down her name and then led her across to where a line of girls were sitting on a line of stools in front of a line of clacking machines. On the shoulder of one of the girls who was punching eye holes in one piece of the upper, by the aid of the machine, he put her hand. "You," he said, "show this girl how to do what you're doing. When you get through, come to me." The girl so addressed rode promptly and gave Carrie her place. "It isn't hard to do," she said, bending over. "You just take this, fasten it so with the clamp, and start the machine." She suited action to word, fashioned the piece of leather, which was eventually to form the right half of the upper of a man's shoe, by little adjustment clamps, and then pushed a small steel rod at the side of the machine. The latter jumped to the task of punching, with sharp, snapping clicks, cutting circular bits of leather out of the side of the upper, leaving holes which were eventually to hold laces. After observing a few times, the girl let her work at it alone. Seeing that it was fairly well done, she went away. The pieces of leather came from the girl at the machine to her right, and were passed to the girl at her left. Carrie saw at once that an average speed was necessary, or the work would pile up on her, and all those below would be delayed. She had no time to look about, and bent anxiously to her task, managing to do it fairly well. The girls at her left and right realized her She had no time to look about and bent anxiously to her task, managing to do fairly well. The girls at her left and right realized her predicament and feelings, and, in a way, tried to aid her as much as they dared by working slower. At this task she labored incessantly for some time, finding relief from her own nervous fears and imaginations in the humdrum mechanical movement of the machine. She felt, as the minutes passed, that the room was not very light. It had a thick odor of fresh leather, but that did not worry her. She felt the eyes of others help upon her, and troubled lest she was not working fast enough. Once, when she was fumbling at the little clamp, having made a slight error in setting the letter, a great hand appeared before her eyes and fastened the clamp for her. It was the foreman. Her heart thumped so that she could scarcely see to go on. Start your machine. Start your machine. Don't keep the line waiting. This recovered her sufficiently, and she went excitedly on, hardly breathing until the shadow moved away from behind her. And then she heaved a great breath. As the morning wore on, the room became hotter. She felt the need of a breath of fresh air and a drink of water, but she did not venture to stir. The stool she sat on was without a back or footrest, and she began to feel uncomfortable. She found after a time that her back was beginning to ache. She twisted and turned from one position to another slightly different, but it did not ease her for long. She was beginning to weary. "Stand up, why don't you?" said the girl to her right, without any form of introduction. "They won't care." Carrie looked at her gratefully. "I guess I will," she said. She stood up from her stool and worked that way for a while, but it was a more difficult position. Her neck and shoulders ached in bending over. The spirit of the place was one which impressed itself upon her in a rough way. She did not venture to look around any, but above the clack of the machine she could hear an occasional remark. She could also note a thing or two out of the side of her eye. So, she's working. There's just pieces of a shoe coming to her right. She stamps a few holes in it with the machine, which would make the eye holes for the laces, and then gives it to the girl left. This is an assembly line. Check the chat here. Means publicly shamed, defined as publicly shamed or disgraced. Dishonorably discharged saluting emoji. 07. That has me saluting, not sure what that means. "Did you see Harry last night?" the girl at her left, addressing her neighbor. "No." "You ought to have seen the tie he had on. Gee, it was a mark." "Tsk," said the other girl, bending over her work. The first silence instantly, assuming a solemn face. The foreman passed slowly along, eyeing each worker distinctively. The moment he was gone, the conversation renewed again. "Say," the girl began at her left. "What'd you think he said?" "I don't know." "He said he saw us with Eddie Harris and Martins that night." "No," they both giggled. A youth with tan-colored hair that needed clipping very badly came shuffling along between the machines, bearing a basket of leather findings under his left arm and pressed against his stomach. When near Carrie, he stretched out his right hand and gripped one girl under the arm. "Oh, let go," she exclaimed angrily. "Duffer." He only grinned broadly in return. "Rubber," he called back as she looked after him. There was nothing of the gallant in him. Carrie got so at last that she could scarcely sit still. Her legs began to tire, and she felt as if she would give anything to get up and stretch. Would noon never come? It seemed as if she had been working an entire day already. She was not hungry at all, but weak, and her eyes were tired, straining at the one point where the eye punch came down and clipped a small piece out of the leather. The girl to her right noticed her squirmings and felt sorry for her. She was concentrating herself too thoroughly. What she did required less mental and physical strain. There was nothing to be done, however. The halves of the uppers piled steadily down. Her hands began to ache at the wrists and then in the fingers. Toward the last, she seemed one mass of dull, complaining muscles, fixed in an eternal position and performing a single mechanical movement, which became more and more distasteful until at last it was absolutely nauseating. When she was most wondering whether the strain would ever cease, a dull-sounding bell clanged somewhere down an elevator shaft, and the end came. In an instant there was a buzz of action and conversation. All the girls instantly left their stools and hurled away into an adjoining room. Men passed through, coming from some department which opened on the right. The whirring wheels began to sing in a steadily modifying key until at last they died away in a low buzz. There was an audible stillness in which the common voice sounded strange. Carrie gladly got up and sought her lunchbox. She was stiff, a little dizzy, and very thirsty. On the way to the small space portioned off by wood where all the wraps and lunches were kept, she encountered the foreman, who stared at her hard. "Well, did you get along all right?" "I think so," she replied respectfully. He replied, for the want of something better, and walked on. Under better material conditions, this kind of work would have not been so bad. But the new socialism, which involves pleasant working conditions for employees, had not taken upon manufacturing companies. The place smelled of the oil of the machines and the new leather, a combination which, added to the stale odors of the building, was not pleasant even in cold weather. The floor, though regularly swept each evening, presented a littered surface. Not the slightest provision had been made for the comfort of the employees, the idea being that something was gained by giving them as little and making the work as hard and unremunerative. There's another old word. Unremunerative. Welcome to Regular Car Views, where a guy with a master's degree doesn't know how to pronounce certain words in English. Unremunerative. It's possible. What we know of footrests, swivel-back chairs, dining rooms for the girls, clean aprons, and curling irons supplied free, and a decent cloakroom were unthought of. So, no, we shouldn't give people chairs with backrests on them. Or footrests, it's got to be hard work. The washrooms and lavatories were disagreeable, crude, if not foul places, and the whole atmosphere was one of hard contact. Carrie looked about her. After she had drunk a tin full of water from a bucket in one corner. Remember, not even water fountains. They don't even have it. Here's a bucket of water, and you can dip a ladle in and drink from that. She's looking around for a place to sit and eat. The other girls ranged themselves about the windows or sat at the workbenches of those of the men who had gone She saw no place which did not hold a couple or a group of girls, and being too timid to think of intruding herself and offering friendly overtones, she sought out her machine and, seated upon her stool, opened her lunch in her lap. There she sat, listening to the chatter and comment which went on in different parts of the room. It was for the most part silly, graced by current slang. Several of the men in the room exchanged compliments with the girls at long range. "Say, Kitty," called one to a girl who was doing a waltz step in a few feet of space near one of the windows. "Are you going to the ball with me?" "Look out, Kitty," called another. "You'll jar your back hair." "Go on, rubber," was her only comment. As Carrie listened to this and much more of the similar familiar bandage among the men and girls, she instinctively withdrew into herself. She was not used to this type and felt that they were something hard and low, and she felt there was something low and hard about it all. She feared that the young boys would address her with such remarks, boys who, besides Drouet, seemed uncouth and ridiculous. She made the average feminine distinction between clothes, putting worth, goodness, and distinction in a dress suit, and leaving all the unlovely qualities and those beneath notice in overalls and a jumper. So she's thinking, these girls suck. These boys are idiots. Everybody here is dumb. Okay, so Industrial Revolutionary. Well, Industrial Revolution is like early 1800s. This is late 1800s. This is Reconstruction era. Carl says, what did he mean by this? I'm in jail. Before germ theory. I think there were doctors. I mean, germ theory, well, you know, this is after Civil War, and surgeons there didn't wash their hands because the surgeon's hands are always clean, blah, blah, blah. So, no real germ theory. She was glad when the short half hour was over and the wheels began to whir again. Though wearied, she would be inconspicuous. This illusion ended when another man passed along the aisle and poked her indifferently in the ribs with his thumb. She turned about, indignation leaping to her eyes, but he had gone on and only once turned to grin. She found it difficult to conquer an inclination to cry. The next girl noticed her state of mind. "Don't you mind, he's too fresh." Carrie said nothing, but bent over her work. She felt as though she could hardly endure such a life. Her idea of work had been so entirely different. All during the long afternoon she thought of the city outside with its imposing show, crowds and fine buildings. Columbia City and the better side of her home life came back. By 3 o'clock, she was sure it must be 6. And by 4, it seemed as if they had forgotten to note the hour and were letting all work overtime. The foreman became a true ogre, prowling constantly about, keeping her tied down to her miserable task. What she had heard of the conversation about her only made her feel sure that she did not want to make friends with any of these. When 6 o'clock came, she hurried eagerly away, her arms aching and her limbs stiff from sitting in one position. As she passed out along the hall, after getting her hat, a young machine head, attracted by her looks, made a bold jest with her. "Say, Maggie," he called, "if you want, I'll walk with you." It was thrown so straight at her direction that she knew who was meant, but never turned to look. In the crowded elevator, another dusty, toil-stained youth tried to make an impression on her by leering in her face. So this other, idiot doesn't even say anything. He just looks at her. One young man, waiting on the walk outside for the appearance of another, grinned at her as she passed. "Ain't going my way, are you?" He called jocosely. Carrie turned her face to the west with a subdued heart. As she turned the corner, she saw through the great shiny window the small desk at which she applied. There were crowds hurrying by with the same budge and energy yielding enthusiasm. She felt a great sigh of relief, but it was her only escape. She felt ashamed in the face of the better-dressed girls who went by. She felt as though she could be better served, and her heart revolted. So that was all her first day of work in this factory in Chicago in 1889. How long have we been talking? It's almost midnight here. I think we'll leave Carrie there on her first day of work at this shoe factory in Chicago. She had come to the Midwest to have a good time in Chicago, and her first day of work was painful. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Have a very good night. We'll probably pick this up tomorrow, or maybe even during the day, because we'll be having some snow. 22 people watching this. Hopefully this could be a thing. I wouldn't mind doing this much more. Anyway. I'll leave you with a little bit of the weather as you're finding yourself coming down to sleep. Current temperature at RCR Central is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Sunrise will be at 7:21 a.m. Sunset will be at 4:37 p.m. Chance of snow, 70%. Humidity, 67%. Winds, north-northeast at 2 miles an hour. Wind chill, 28 degrees. Current precipitation, 0 inches. Pressure is 30.23 inches of mercury. Visibility, 10 miles. We'll go to Weather Underground to see if we get a little bit more. You know what? We don't. They don't give you the paragraph. Wind gusts from the north 2 miles an hour. Humidity 67%, 2.18 degrees. Pressure is rising, UV index 0. It also says flu, which is high. Mostly clear this evening, then becoming cloudy after midnight. Low, 27 degrees Fahrenheit, winds light and variable. Does it give you... I like these paragraphs. So precipitation, the snow is scheduled to begin around 9 a.m. tomorrow. Maybe a little bit earlier. So this is the end. Thank you for everybody who has been watching this. Peace. It's the Cassandas. There's a YouTube channel that play old weather scan. Excellent. How many pages to get through today? I think we did about 9 or 10. I could fall asleep listening to this. Insomnia sucks. Loving this so far. Listen to it on a walk. It's 46 degrees here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thank you, Anthony. Well, for Nick, who is not here, have a very good night. Good night.